Hello, friends. Hello from Jerusalem. I hope everyone is doing well and being healthy. This is again the time of the year that we all, or many parts of the world, start changing their watches within the different time zones. Daytime savings is a hassle, although it's good. We want to keep the environment healthy, and it's one of the good tools that we use to keep the planet healthy, and we use less electricity, hopefully. Although many people would actually challenge this theory, but at least the idea is good. We want to welcome you again into another Kumi session, another week with Sabil. Thank you all for being with us. Already, I think Ryan is sharing information of this meeting in the chat. So if you'd like to share it with others who might be interested in joining, please do on Facebook or on social media. The session is open. It is being broadcasted live on Facebook, so some people are also watching us there. My name is Omar Harami. I see some new people, and I work at Sabil, and I'm one of the people who are from the Kumi team, which we aim every week to shed light on a specific topic. This week we're speaking about the theme of the week is actually restrictions of movement. I am one of the people that have to cross a checkpoint every day, and I haven't been enjoying waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, not to spend a few hours at the checkpoint every day, so that I'll be able to be early at Sabil, do some good work, hopefully to challenge the occupation and to work for justice. But also the people who are specialized about checkpoints and restrictions on movement are actually EAPPI, which is a wonderful project of the World Council of Churches. I'm very happy that we have with us Jack Menayer. Jack Menayer is one of the leaders of the Palestinian community, and specifically also from the Palestinian Christian community. So Jack, it's such a great pleasure to have you with us. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you and join you for this meeting.
Thank you, Jack. And thank you also for being with us. It has been a tradition at Sabil that before, in every meeting, we have the speakers introduce themselves. Many people know you, and some people already know you, but would like to know a little bit more about you. So please do introduce yourself, Jack, personally, who Jack is. You're going to get a chance to speak about the APPI later on in the program.
It's a big question, who Jack is. So I'm Jack, I'm 33. I'm from Jerusalem. I'm half English, and I'm half Palestinian Christian with an Israeli citizenship. So I hold the blue ID within the fragmentation of our community. I'm ecumenical, so I'm half Greek Orthodox and half Anglican. So this is a bit of a strange mix. I'm Greek Anglican, or whichever type of combination you want to imagine. And I'm married to Rawan, who's from Shafama, from the Galilee, and I have two sons, Salim and John, who are 4 and 2, who I'm sure you will hear in the background of this call at one point or another, whether they burst through the room or hit each other on the head. It will be one of the two. And my background is human rights. This is my interest, international law. I did my BA in criminology and sociology in the United Kingdom. And then I continued with a master's degree in human rights and transitional justice here in Jerusalem. And for the past almost 4 years now, I have been coordinating the EAPPI program. I see that there's some former EAs on the call, or people who are involved in different ways. I'm also involved in a number of different advocacy groups. This is my passion, to be honest with you, is advocacy and talking about the situation here. Let's see, what else about me? I'm very happy because now this is the season of Aqub. So we have lots of different plants that come in and out of season for dishes, and I'm very much looking forward to the next season ahead of us as it ushers in the spring. I think that's more or less it about me. Yeah, so I don't know, Omar, back to you, I suppose.
I mean, it's not after mentioning that it's the season of Akub, you're going to get our community confused. Could you tell them a little bit what Akub is?
This is difficult to explain. It is part of a very spiky plant that is used during this season, and it's not easy to get because of how spiky it is. So there are many different indigenous plants to Palestine, which we enjoy based on the season, and this is one of them. And you will find it many times in the markets at Damascus Gate and other areas where people have picked them and brought them there.
And actually, it's illegal to collect akub in the wilderness. So Israel labels them as endangered species. Although I'm in the market, so I always ask, it is the farmers, how difficult it is to find akub. They say it's not difficult, it's everywhere. It's the problem is getting it into Jerusalem. So akub is very delicious. It's very difficult and time consuming. You have to live under occupation with no freedom of movement so that you have lots of free time on your hands to cook akub. It wouldn't be possible if you're to have a fast food restaurant that offers akub. But so Jack Nair, you started mentioning that you work with the EAPPI, which is a project of the World Council of Churches. So could you please a little bit introduce, the project, the World Council of Churches, for the people who are not aware of the World Council of Churches, and the EAPPI projects?
The World Council of Churches is a network of over 500 million Christians worldwide. It's an ecumenical network of churches who all fall under this membership of being part of the World Council of Churches. And here in Palestine, we have a number of churches who are members. And 20 years ago, or just over 20 years ago, these heads of churches came together and put out a call to the global church and specifically to the World Council of Churches to have a church response to the injustices and the human rights violations that we see here in the land. And so a program was developed both theologically and humanitarian, and in the humanitarian way, to bring internationals to come and accompany vulnerable Palestinian communities. And the first places that EAs, we call them, ecumenical accompaniers, came and accompanied Palestinians were at the checkpoint. So actually the first issue that was addressed was restriction of movement. And what was quickly discovered is that if you have an international standing at the checkpoint with a jacket and notepad and is watching what is going on, it either prevents or reduces incidents of violence and harassment by security forces, and many times will alleviate some of the difficulty that Palestinians face as they go through military checkpoints. The program then expanded to do accompaniment when it comes to access to education. So EAs will accompany children to school, from school, at checkpoints where lots of children travel to school to make sure that they are able to travel without or with minimal harassment. We do access to livelihood. So there's a lot of shepherding that EAs are involved with. So we will accompany shepherds and their flocks as they try to feed them and try and reduce and prevent settler and security force harassment. So this is what we call protective presence. We try to provide protective presence to vulnerable Palestinian communities. The second part is to document incidents. So we document human rights violations, we document incidents of violence as they take place, and refer it to other organizations and bodies in the hopes that they can assist with legal aid or humanitarian intervention. And that will actually be what we are going to focus on soon. And then the third part, which is the most important part of what EAPPI does, is advocacy. We are meant to be witnesses of what goes on here and share it broadly across the world for the different EAs that come and participate. So over the past year, we've had EAs come from 16 different countries And the hope is that each one of those will return home and share the stories, the relationships that they have built with the Palestinian community, in hopes that it brings change in the long term. This is more or less a summary of EAPPI. We operate in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. This is where we are mandated to be present. We live with the communities. We walk shoulder to shoulder with the communities. And it's a relational program. It's not just coming in armored vehicles or live in gated compounds, but actually walk with Palestinians every day as they walk through their life, the same way that Jesus did 2,000 years ago when he was here, walking the land, whether it was meeting the Samaritan woman at the well or Zacchaeus, the tax collector, up a tree. He walked shoulder to shoulder with people. He conversed with them. He broke bread with them. And this is the model that EAPPI is built on.
Thank you. And for the people, most of our crowd is very much aware of what's happening in Palestine. So the protective presence is mostly at checkpoints, is actually from Israeli soldiers, while we're being in the West Bank with the shepherds, it is actually most of the danger is from settlers.
Today it's both. Today it's hard to tell the difference between one and the other. I mean, that's been the case for a while, but it's certainly a reality with this new government. And I don't know if I'm able to start sharing now a short presentation.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So EAPPI had been operating for almost 20 years. Every day of the year, there are internationals present accompanying on the ground. And my question, or the question that the program has had for a long time, is what happens if we are not present? What happens if the international community takes their attention off the occupation and the injustices of what we face here? And now, maybe for the first time, we can present with a certain amount of confidence what the impact of the lack of accompaniment means for the Palestinian community. And so I'm going to share with you a lot of data or a certain amount of data. So bear with me as we run through this. But I want us to go through this together and then discuss what we see. So I'll just start sharing my screen. All right, I'm going to assume that you can see my screen. So we did a whole data review of comparing the year 2022 to the previous 5 years that the program had been active to see what our impact is. Now, the reason we were able to do this was basically COVID. So during the period of time of COVID, we had no accompaniers on the ground. You had no diplomatic visits. You had no pilgrims, no tourists. And very much the Palestinian community was even more isolated than it normally is. So the numbers that you're going to see are going to reflect our reporting mechanisms. It's not the total amount of human rights violation on the ground. And there's multi-factor influences into what this information shows. So if we look at our work in the area of Hebron, you can see the difference between 2022 and the previous years before COVID. So as you can see in 2020, COVID hit. 2021, we had no activities on the ground, and we returned in 2022. We are seeing an increase of almost 500% in violations that we are recording in the city of Hebron. In total, we see about an increase of 1,167% incidence of violence. These numbers are unbelievable, but they reflect the reality on the ground of what it means when the international community is suddenly absent. The areas that we saw the most impact on communities in Hebron during this period of time in 2022 was an increase of harassment, mostly by settlers. The second category was access to education. And the third category was access to livelihood. In all these categories, you can see a clear increase in 2022 compared to the previous years. This is just to highlight the increase in harassment. Now, keep in mind that each case that you see, each incident that you see here, so there's 63 incidents of harassment. That does not mean that 63 people were harassed. Those are 63 incidents of harassment. In each incident, you can have one individual, or you can have 50 individuals who are all harassed in that incident. So this is simply looking at how many incidents we are recording. In the South Hebron Hills, you can see that the trend is more or less the same, with, of course, a sharp increase also in displacement. Here we see an over 200% increase in total violations. We see a 290% increase in the displacement of people, and 295% increase in violence. And as we're running through these numbers, I want you to keep in mind that in 2022, we just restarted the program, and we restarted with reduced teams. We did not have the normal sort of number of accompaniers that you would have in 2018 or 2019. We were in reduced capacity. Second of all, at least for a large part of 2022, the accompaniers had to abide by COVID quarantine restrictions. So if EAs had COVID, they had to quarantine. They had to quarantine when they arrived. So in actual fact, if we had returned straight away to full strength, and if we didn't have these restrictions, we predict that the numbers would be much higher. Now, of course, for displacement, this is the government's attempts to displace the Palestinian communities in the Masafer Yatta area. So we are accompanying people and communities as they are being actively displaced from their homes and from their communities. So here we see an increase again in harassment by settlers, access to livelihood, which normally means land, and then demolitions. We have had increased requests to assist with shepherding because of how bad settler violence has become. We are seeing settlers using aerial drones to harass shepherds and their sheep, and the drones scare the sheep very much. We see the use of dogs, the use of motorbikes and quad bikes, and even in extreme cases, we have seen settlers that have broken the legs of sheep in order to create a financial burden on the shepherd. Do I rehabilitate my sheep, which has an increased financial cost, or do I sell or slaughter my sheep, in which case I lose a source of income? You can also see that we've had a sharp increase in requests for sleepover visits. The numbers that you see at the bottom are the numbers of the groups that participate in the program, where each group comes with a specific number. And you can see that there are many families that feel unsafe to sleep at night without the protective presence of internationals. So we are getting many, many requests for people saying that the settlers are targeting us at night. Please come and stay in my home with me. Now in the Jordan Valley, as I said, we had reduced capacity. We only had 2 groups in 2022. So we took the average amount of violations that is recorded per group. And the Jordan Valley is the unspoken and has a lack of attention when in the discussions of human rights violations for Palestinians. But Jordan Valley is where we see the highest increase of violence. This is an area that is experiencing unprecedented levels of attacks and harassment, and it's not being spoken about. Now, the Jordan Valley area that we cover is huge, so we don't manage to cover all these incidents. We are only managing to cover the incidents that we see. But this has the sharpest increase, 1,450% increase in incidents of violence against Palestinian communities. And 2023 will be higher than the numbers you see here, based on the numbers that we see for the first 2 months of this year. So yeah, here again, access to livelihoods. This is a lot of shepherding related incidents, harassment by settlers. You can see that the numbers have jumped in huge amounts, and also the arrest and detention of people. Again, this is just the reflection of how sharp these increases have been for each category. Jerusalem is the exception. Jerusalem is the only location where we haven't seen a large increase compared to previous years when it comes to violations. Now, there definitely is an uprise trend compared to certain years, but altogether, we are not seeing more violent years than others. And the question is why? And so our assumption is that, first of all, with the return of internationals on the ground, a lot of the violence, the settler attacks, the army attacks have happened at night. So when in the absence of internationals, many of the incidents would happen during the day. And so we are not able to record these incidents as effectively in the APPI. The second assumption is that for minor incidents of harassment and violence, especially in the old city and in certain neighborhoods, we are seeing a difference. 2 weeks ago, I was detained by the border police because I interfered with their assault on a child. I witnessed them physically assaulting a child. I took out my camera, I intervened, and although they continued to detain the child, they at least stopped choking and hitting him. And so we are seeing in certain areas where we are, that with the presence of EAs and with the presence of people who accompany, we are seeing small decreases. We are seeing, however, sharp increases in the detention of people, which is very concerning. Now, Bethlehem, traditionally in the program, is known as sort of the more quiet area. It does face, of course, the injustices of the occupation, but not like Hebron, and not like the Jordan Valley or the South Hebron Hills. And our data shows that this situation has now changed. We are seeing around a 250% increase in violations and a 656% increase in violence. Access to livelihood, arrest and detention, and access to education are the ones that have had the highest amount of violations. Let's keep moving. One of the things that we've seen is the sharp increase also in the level of violence that we see. So we're not just seeing an increase of harassment quantitatively, we are also seeing a sharp increase in the physical injury of civilians in the Bethlehem area compared to previous years. We have also recorded the deaths of civilians at the highest rates compared to previous years. This is not to say that Palestinians have not been killed during this period of time, but the ones that our accompaniers are reporting on have certainly increased. So that was a lot of information, and we can return to it if we need to. But what I want us to talk about, what I want us to think about is why. Why have we seen such a sharp increase? And we have to assume and analyze this, and we have former EAs here on the call. It might be interesting to see what they think. But here's our assessment, that with the absence of internationals on the ground, with the absence of EAs, the absence of tourists, the absence of journalists, the settler movement and the Israeli government have taken a strong and intentional step to put pressure on the vulnerable Palestinian communities in order to displace them from their homes, to increase the pressure of the violence of the occupation, and to expand the settlement project. We have not increased the amount of activities that we do compared to other groups. So it's not that our EAs are covering necessarily a huge amount of area compared to the past. The difference is simply that the violence has tripled, quadrupled, and you know, in the 1,000% increase. And this is why speaking to you today is so important. It's important to speak to you because it is our efforts and our continued engagement on this issue that has a direct consequence for the lives and the experience of vulnerable Palestinian communities. And when we take our eye off the ball, when we don't advocate and engage on the injustices against the Palestinian people here, someone is going to take advantage of that. And the consequences of it are literally life and death for many people. With this new government, we don't know what the future will be like for groups like EAPPI and other people who are trying to support the Palestinian cause on the ground. But our ability to work is being restricted by this as well. The more violence that settlers and soldiers are using, the less access that we are able to have. It's a risk for everyone involved, of course. So this is, I know I ran through these numbers very quickly, but I did want to sort of share with you at the very least what is very visibly the most concerning thing for us here on the ground. At this point, I want to stop. I wanted to open up to your questions and discussions. I see that there's some in the chat as well.
But before we move into the questions, Jack, I just want to try to clarify some issues. So the numbers that you have shared, or the data, it's information that EAPPI has collected. And when you say collected, it means like it's within these attacks happened or occurred in the communities that you have teams, or it's the teams have witnessed?
It's both. And so this is only information of EAPPI. So imagine all the other information that is missed, that isn't reported to different organizations, Palestinians that choose not to report this because of their disappointments with the international mechanisms or the lack of change that they see at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So this is only communities that we work with, many of which the EAs witness themselves, and some of which are followed up on a later date if it is missed by them.
So within, I mean, the West Bank and Gaza, and I mean, it's the whole historical Palestine is a small piece of land. But in how many localities are you located as EAPPI?
So when I put Jordan Valley or Jerusalem, this is talking about governances. We're talking about a huge area of land. So I see Mike here on the call was an EA in Jerusalem. That didn't just cover the old city of Jerusalem and Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah. It also included the communities that live in E1, the Bedouin communities of Khan al-Ahmar. So some of the areas that we work cover the whole governance or parts of governance or cross governances. So these are huge areas. In total at the moment, we cover about 240 different communities across the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we have not been able to return to all the communities that we worked with before COVID. Before COVID, we used to cover a larger area, and this is not the case at the moment. So there's a lot of data out there and a lot of incidents that are either not being reported or being partially reported. So
today, I mean, it is EAPPI. So many different countries and nationalities join EAPPI. How are the current team composed, or since COVID? Are most people coming? Are North Americans, Europeans?
So predominantly we have Europeans, those coming from the West. But through grant funding that the program has managed to attain, we have a higher representation of those coming from Latin America, from South Africa, and other areas where don't have the ability to fund their EAs alone. And so this is this means that we still have a majority of people from the West, but in this current group that we have now, we have people from Ecuador, Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, and South Africa that don't represent those coming from Europe. So 5 different countries. We have Canadians who are not European, of course, but relatively few coming from North America in general.
But when we talk about international presence, that it is if there's an international presence, it's less likely that that the army, the occupation army, or settlers will be as violent as they would be if there wasn't an international presence. When we talk about international presence, do we mean mainly like white people? Is the international presence that they pay more attention to, or anybody who is not Palestinian?
This is anyone who's not Palestinian, and our groups are always mixed. But even the presence of, say, a team that doesn't include any white or European EAs has a similar effect. We've seen it in Hebron, we've seen it in Jerusalem. When you put the EAPPI jacket and you have the international passport, you are operating on a different level of engagement. Now, as the settlers and army become more more supported to use violence and to care less about international law, our effectiveness is reduced. And so this is why we push for advocacy so strong. When we have strong advocacy, we are able to be stronger, of course, on the ground as well. We also have to remember that we are operating within a settler colonial context where the passport privilege and the ethno-religious identity of a person and the access that they have internationally indicates a level of power. That is something that we have to keep in mind when we talk about international protective presence.
How is the Israeli government? Because you're located, I mean, you're in Jerusalem. How does the Israeli government deal with the work of EAPPI? And I mean, I think there's also like CPT, Community Peacemaker Teams, and Peace Dove. So there are a multiple of international organizations that bring international presence. How are the way they are treated compared to EAPPI, and how is the government? How welcoming is the government?
So out of the international organizations that provide protective presence, there are very few that are left after COVID. Many have stalled or are struggling to return. So for example, Operation Dove only operates in the South Hebron Hills. CPT at the moment only operates in the old city of Hebron, and to my knowledge have not had internationals present since COVID, since restarting. So in many areas, EAPPI is the only one left when it comes to international presence. And such international accompaniment programs are not well liked by the government for reasons that we can all imagine, but we are not doing anything illegal. And so we have restrictions. We might have difficulty at the airports, the access of EAs. You might have attempts by the military to hinder the access of accompaniers to communities. But we are not here to intervene and interfere. We are here to accompany. And I think this is a big difference. We are here to walk with the people. And so we are in some ways maybe more conservative than other activists. And so as long as we continue to accompany people, in theory, we are on the right side of the different rules and regulations. But I see one question in the chat already about the ability to document such things. And currently there are new laws under this government, which might be proposed, that you cannot photograph a military personnel while they are on duty. And I would not be surprised that we see other such laws and restrictions come that would limit accompaniment in such a way.
We have a question from one of our participants. My partner was an EAPPI volunteer in the South Hebron Hills in 2022, so recently, and she observed the effects of harassment on the mental health of families. Can you discuss the effects of harassment?
I cannot really begin to describe the levels of trauma, the pain, the uncertainty that the communities are now feeling, the levels of fear. This can be expressed in so many different ways: in lack of sleep, in the inability to function well when it comes to work. For children, we're talking about their ability to study. So their educational ability is affected by such trauma and pressures, and the psychosocial support that they need. So it's very common to have bedwetting for many children that are traumatized in such a way. So it's hundreds of thousands of people that are experiencing repeated trauma every single day and every single week. And even if we ended the occupation, it feels like we would still need so long to help people recover from the violence and the harassment and injustices that they have been facing. It's a very important question, but it's one that's hard to answer, as we are still facing these things on a regular basis.
We have a question in the chat. So when you collect the information, what do you do with it? Do you share it with the decision makers like Congress people, parliamentarians, or do you just send it through the channels of the World Council of Churches?
So this information is really is very important for each individual EA to use when they deal with their representatives here on the ground, if they meet them, and when they go back home with their members of parliament. We trust that they carried this information on. We, of course, here have a relationship with a number of different either members of Congress or Parliament that this information is presented to, but there's not a strong political will by governments to really take that further, unfortunately. So, the ambassadors, political officers, representative offices, they know most of this, of what I'm sharing with you now, but they get stuck when it comes to the political will of who they report to in their home countries. But yes, this information is not just as to witness, but it's also to use it to advocate, whether it's members of Congress, whether it's churches, whether it's universities. This is what this information is for.
I don't think that you work in Gaza. Do you work in Gaza, or have you worked in Gaza as EAPPI?
No, EAPPI has never worked in Gaza, nor do I think that international protective presence would be effective, especially as most of the attacks against the Palestinian population come from the sky or from very far away. There used to be international protective presence in Gaza until one of those people in the International Solidarity Movement, ISM as it's known, her name was Rachel Corrie, was killed by an Israeli bulldozer. And since then, there has not been a return to Gaza by internationals.
Does EAPPI do like monitoring, or I mean, it's on the behavior of the PA when it comes to respecting international law or human rights? I mean, is this something like part of the mandate of EAPPI, or you're only focused on occupation attacks resulting from the occupation?
This is a good question. Any human rights violation that we see, no matter who the perpetrator is reported. But the mandate is to deal with international humanitarian law. And the first and foremost responsibility in such a situation is the occupying power, even if the power that is being occupied is indeed also violating that law. We leave that to the different international commissions, whether it's the UN or others that report on it regularly. Our issue is to deal with the occupation by the Israeli government and military of the Palestinian population.
We have another question. Have you experienced no videoing of incidents and occupying soldiers' behavior? Any arrests of gathering information?
If soldiers ask us to stop filming, we must obey. the commanding powers a request. We are not here to violate anyone's orders, which means there are moments where such things are not documented, at least videoed. But each EA will document what they see, whether it's by a soldier or by a Palestinian or anyone else. So there are certain areas, of course, that it is illegal to record. You're not allowed to record within a military checkpoint, nor within certain military firing zones when military practices are taking place. So we abide by all these things, even if it does restrict what we are able to document.
Do we know if it's possible to reinstate TIF, temporary international presence, in Hebron?
There are no plans, nor will from the Israeli government to reinstate such international protective presence in Hebron. Unfortunately, so.
One of the attendees is saying, my partner and myself were meeting with our MP here in England on Friday, where she will give him a briefing on Friday of her EAPPI experience. Will it be possible for you to share these charts with participants here today? Can you make them public?
I'm afraid I cannot. I know that this is being streamed live, but this information is not made public for anyone's use, even though in theory you could do that. I would encourage you in whichever country you are present to get in touch with the body that deals with EAPPI. So for example, in the United Kingdom, it's through the Quakers who can help provide this information for you. This would be, and as former EAs have easy access to this type of information through their national coordinators and through their own online access to data within our systems. But this is not a presentation. I'm presenting this to you as brothers and sisters that are with us in solidarity, but it is not yet a public tool or publication that can be used. So I would ask that, again, I know it's live, but still.
But there's also, I think there's already published reports. I think Acha publishes on Beit Salem some more also reports that you could also use as a reference. But that is also an opportunity. But please do contact your churches or the representing bodies of EAPPI.
Absolutely, Omar. There are many organizations that complementarily document and report on these incidents more broadly.
So are you allowed, so that's a specific question to you, are you allowed to be present in Hebron Old City?
So EAPPI has been present in the Old City of Hebron since December of 2019, with, of course, the exception of the COVID period, where we were not present. It's a very difficult place to be present, both by soldier harassment and restriction, and indeed settler, but we are present in these areas at the moment.
So part of the training that, what kinds of trainings, when people join EAPPI, what kinds of trainings do you provide for them to equip them to be able to deal with extremists, with violence, with all of the difficulties of operating in the occupied territories?
This is a very good question, and again, I see some former EAs here on the call that have gone through exhaustive trainings. Initially, one must be trained in their own home country, and each home country has its own method of doing the training, but there, generally speaking, is a minimum threshold of information that an EA needs to have and needs to be prepared for before they come here. Once they arrive, they receive a further 10 days of instructions by us in the Jerusalem office. It includes things like safety and security, an introduction to the Palestinian culture, how to effectively document and upload such things, what makes a compelling picture if you are taking a picture of an incident, and many other subjects that relate to doing no harm to the Palestinian community that one might accompany. So it's a rather extensive training to try and prepare people as best as possible. A lot of the training is focused on team dynamics. Many times our biggest challenge is not with settlers and soldiers, who are generally speaking predictable in what we expect from them, but it's living together as a team of 4 different or 5 different individuals coming from different cultures and different backgrounds in very, very stressful situations. So many times it's managing people's personalities and culture misunderstandings within the team. And so there's a lot of focus on this as well.
Do you also include theological training? Because many of the people go back and they speak in their churches, and they would unfortunately encounter Christian Zionism, that they would find a theological justification for the actions of some of the settlers or even the whole occupation.
Most of the ecumenical accompaniers today, I would describe as non-religious. That doesn't mean that they do not speak in churches, but most of them do not come from religious institutions. And those that are more religious and Christian, we center around Jerusalem and Bethlehem so that they have access or more access to the Palestinian Christian community. So there is no specific training on countering Christian Zionism, but that is a conversation that I do have with specific EAs who make such requests when they go home and anticipate to deal with it. A lot of the advocacy, the challenges that one faces back home, whether you are dealing with a Christian Zionist or someone who is, let's say, part of the pro-Israel lobby, the arguments are generally speaking the same. The only difference is the specific theological ones, which different national coordinators are able to assist with. But it's not a specific training session that we provide.
So we have a question in the chat. Many people are aware of the challenges in the last World Council of Churches meeting in August, September that took place last year. If the churches are receiving information about the challenges of human rights violations that are happening in the Holy Land, in Palestine, Israel, at checkpoints in different communities, why is there still not enough action being taken from the churches?
I think I should ask you that question. All of those of you who participate in different church communities internationally, why have your churches not taken more action? The WCC is a network which represents church members. And so its engagement on the topic is based on, generally speaking, the decisions of church members. And so I think that as much as we, someone mentioned Congress people in the chat and members of parliament, but we have a lot of internal advocacy to work on with first and foremost our own internal circles of influence, right? The people that we have access to. So I think that this is a big challenge for all of us that engage with churches, is how much more work needs to be done before we even reach out further externally.
We're receiving some questions or people from the US who are interested in joining EAPPI. Whom do they contact? What happens? Like, what's the procedure?
So on the website of EAPPI, and I see someone has put in the chat, and on the EAPPI website, you can find the different countries which people are able to come and participate in this program. And each country will have the contact email over there. So if you're in Switzerland, you will have the contact of the organization and or body that deals with Swiss EAs, likewise for the United States and many others.
So it's pretty easy, hopefully. The increased violence in Bethlehem, is it caused by the incursions of the Israeli army or by other factors?
That's a really good question. That's definitely a factor, but I think it's the communities that are in the periphery, in the surrounding area of the Bethlehem governance, that are at the forefront of facing settler and military attacks. So if we think of villages like Toko, or we're thinking of villages like Kisan, These are villages and communities on the outskirts of Bethlehem city and are vulnerable to settler and military harassment. And this is where we're seeing this intentional increase of activity against the population. There are, of course, military incursions into villages like Hosan and Al-Khadr areas. These types of, sorry, not Al-Khadr, but different communities in the area around that are facing it. Within Bethlehem Area A, it's less so.
In Hebron, it used to be Christian peacemaker teams, now it's community peacemaker teams, I think. They started to switch the model to include more locals to be part of the teams so that they could help with monitoring and connect with the local community. In a way, it defies the logic of international presence help to decrease the violence. Another way it also makes it easier for people to communicate and to connect on the ground. Is EAPPI thinking of maybe to open up for some of the locals to join EAPPI?
This is a very complicated question. We are here at the mandate and the will of the heads of churches in Jerusalem. And so at the moment, we have a clear mandate that deals with international presence. But I think with the weaknesses of initiatives like ours, when you consider COVID, where suddenly there's a complete absence, we have to try and think of methods in which we include both international and local partners working together. From a practical perspective, most EAs will tell you that the biggest frustration, or one of the biggest frustrations they have, is not being able to speak Arabic. It really provides such a barrier to connect with people. So by having a member of the community with you present all the time, you can imagine that forms a very convenient bridge. It's not something that we have piloted, and I think that it's complicated to navigate legally as well. But nonetheless, it is something that is being discussed, generally speaking, within the different accompaniment circles.
So in your opinion, I think we're running out of time, Jack, but I mean, I'd like us to conclude maybe with few words of encouragement on, like, it's what you've been for some time now with the EAPPI. What has been really the biggest impact of EAPPI in the past period? And how can people genuinely support EAPPI and the important work that you're doing?
Well, first of all, you are supporting right now by talking to me. I mean, this is a form of support. I don't mean this just as an individual. I mean, as a community of people who are dedicated to non-violently speak out against the injustices that we see within our own identity setting, which in this case happens to also be church or Christian related. And so what I tell the EAs is that the occupation's design is a design of isolation. It is meant to isolate Palestinians from Palestinians, Palestinians from Israelis, and Palestinians from the international community. So by talking together now today, this is a form of countering that. I think that the biggest impact we have seen is how that when we returned to the city of Hebron, people were celebrating the return of EAs, of internationals. They were honking their car horns and clapping and celebrating the fact that internationals have returned. It's hard to talk about it as a positive when you see the numbers that we present. It's very hard to find positives, but there is a very clear impact that we have in reducing such incidents. And we can say this with more confidence now than we have been able to say that before. Yesterday, I was in the Jordan Valley and I met communities who are in the most desperate situation that you can imagine. But they are so encouraged by the fact that there are people from all around the world that still desire to be in solidarity with them and that still continue to carry their voices. And so, to answer the last part of your question, Omar, to conclude, my hope, and I know that you all already do, is to continue to engage actively, not just with groups like EAPPI, but with everyone that can speak up about what we see. And I know that many people do this already, but our continued engagement is directly related to the day-to-day impact on Palestinian people's lives, even if you do not see it or feel it. For EAPPI, we need more people involved. We don't have enough people to cover all the areas that we want to cover. We don't have enough people to fill the teams that we need to fill. And so those of you that are able to reach out to different national coordinators that are churches that are associated with EAPPI, please don't let them forget about us. And please continue to carry the message bravely and boldly, as I imagine all of you already do.
Thank you very much, Jack. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing. Thank you for all of the EAs, whether they served in the past or they're currently serving or they're on the way or they're thinking of becoming an EA. The presence and accompaniment it's with us in the Holy Land is important. It's wonderful to pray with us and to pray for us. Thank you all for all of the amazing work that is taking place. May we see very soon a day that we don't need accompaniment of internationals to be able to go safe to school or to go to work safely and return safely. Thank you all. Thank you, Jack. Take care and see you next week, friends. Take care.